Glad you joined us in the trenches with Dave Lapham, brought to you by First Star Logistics, because we have a very special guest today, Peter King, NFL insider extraordinaire. He has got knowledge of the entire league and all components. We're talking about owners, general managers, head coaches, players. Peter King has his contacts at every level of the National Football League. And we want to talk to him about what he saw, the Monday night performance for the Cincinnati Bengals up in Cleveland against the Browns, and how did the Bengals recover and move on to have a successful season. He's got his opinions. Peter King always does. You're going to like it. Thanks for joining us in the trenches with Dave Lapham, brought to you by First Star Logistics, as always, in our outstanding studios. And do we have a guest for you today? The iconic, the legendary one, the one and only, Peter King. What's going on, my man?
Dave, great to talk to you. Long time no chat. Hope you're doing well. And you've got a fascinating ball club to follow right now, the Cincinnati Bengals.
I know. How about it's a Jekyll and Hyde situation a little bit, isn't it? It's absolutely crazy. Just when you think, win 4 out of 5, things are kind of turning around a little bit, and then falls apart. 13 road nationally televised games in the loss column, an NFL record. 13 straight road games nationally televised. Couldn't get the W.
Wow.
And it's an NFL record. That's unbelievable.
I think the weirdest thing is that since they drafted Joe Burrow, they're 0-5 against the Browns. It's weird. It just is really weird. And look, everybody in that division traditionally is pretty close. The difference, I think, this year is that while you got Pittsburgh and Cleveland with unsteady quarterback situations, you've got Baltimore and Cincinnati, which, look, I said at the beginning of the year, game 272, I predict, is going to be, Cincinnati hosting Baltimore on Sunday night of week 18. And, I think that because I think they're both really good teams. And, the NFL is going to want a division championship game if it can, in that last window of the year. But I like Cincinnati, but you sort of thought they would come back to earth just a little bit. And look, as you know, Dave, it wasn't like they ran the table last year. Whatever
Right.
They were 10-7 during the season. They got hot at the right time, had a red hot quarterback and a red hot kicker, and the rest was history.
You're right, Peter. I mean, last year, after 9 games, the Bengals were 5-4. Hopefully, after 9 games this year, they're 5-4.
Going into the bye, yeah.
Yeah, going into the bye. And after in the middle of November last year, the Bengals were 7-6.
Yeah.
And then, caught a little fire and then get into the playoffs and were caught red hot fire at the appropriate time. There's no doubt about it. But boy, to have 3 division losses, it's like,
yeah, that's bad.
That's hurtful, because the tiebreaker situation, you got to hope you're going against somebody head to head that you've beaten. That's the first tiebreaker. And then you get to the division stuff. And now you got to run the table in the second half of the season. And with the other difficult games they've got, that's no easy task. There's no question.
Well, I look at their schedule, and I mean, it's at the beginning of the year, I thought Baltimore and Cincinnati certainly would both make the playoffs.
Right.
I'm really uncertain about that now. And to be able to beat Baltimore, the Bengals, I think, not only are going to have to win that final game of the year, but you're right, they're going to have to be in position to have a better record than the Ravens entering that last weekend. So they got a tough road, especially because, when you are at Tennessee and then you've got maybe the best 2 teams in football, Kansas City and Buffalo, on the schedule, even though those both are at home, I mean, that's that's really tough. That's why I think last night's game was really significant, and that was a bad loss for them last night. And we'll see what ends up happening, but they haven't done themselves any favors in the first 8 weeks.
No doubt about it. And Jamar Chase, you knew that he was going to be missed, but the thing that the trickle down, the ripple effect of no Jamar Chase, not only does he take the top off the defense and, draw defenders in that way, but there's a trickle down to the running game as well. Not that the Bengals had a running game that was being real productive for them. They only ran the ball 10 times last night, a franchise low, the fewest ever in any game in franchise history.
Wow.
10 rushes of the football. Now they were running these, little flat passes to Joe Mixon and checkdowns, kind of an extension of the running game as such. But I'll tell you what, I tip my cap to the Cleveland Browns. They tackled. I mean, they shrunk space and they got people on the ground. Very rarely did any Bengal make that first guy miss. The first guy made the play.
Yeah. I think, Dave, that one of the things watching watching a lot of that game was that, I mean, when you think about it, so many NFL teams are so close right now.
Yep.
And there's no lock, almost no lock, no matter who you're talking about. But I thought the disappointing thing in that game for Cincinnati was, and again, I don't necessarily count that first turnover because it was a weird one. It was a twice deflected pass.
Right.
But in a game like that, especially when you're without Jamar Chase, you've just really got to be uber conscious that you're just simply not going to turn the ball over.
Yep.
And I think the other part of that game, that when you think about it, the one thing that would really bother me looking back at that game is sort of all the signs of life they gave Cleveland. And by that, I mean, look, that Cleveland's going to be able to run the ball well. Bill Parcells used to say, don't necessarily tell me about what a great rushing average you have. He was always really big on how many carries did you get in the game? How much clock were you able to eat because you were able to control the ball?
Yep.
The most worrisome thing out of that game is, look, Nick Chubb's great. You got to like Nick Chubb. Kareem Hunt's good too. They got a very good combo platter, and they ran for 150 between them.
Yep.
And they did it without Wyatt Teller too,
right.
One of the best guards in the league.
Yep.
I think if I am the Bengals looking back at that game, my biggest issue that I have is the long drives we allowed, the clock eating drives that we allowed. And I looked it up this morning, Dave. They had 4 drives. The Browns had 4 drives of 8 plays or more.
Yep.
And they had 2 7-play drives too. So to me, I think when you're looking back at that game and dissecting it, if you're the Bengals, you say that our biggest issue is that we just couldn't be much more than a speed bump to their running game.
Well, you hit it right on the head. You're looking at, and 3 of those 4 drives that you described, Peter, of 8 plays or more, happened back to back to back.
Yeah.
To start the second half. They had 2 drives in the third quarter. One 11-play, 75-yard touchdown, one 8-play, 60-yard touchdown. And then to start the fourth quarter, the third straight drive, 8 plays, 83 yards and a touchdown, 27 plays, 218 yards, 21 touchdowns. And bear in mind, the Bengals had not allowed a touchdown in the second half the whole season, the whole year. I mean, you're talking, the third team to do that since 1970, and Cleveland comes out and breaks that and breaks it big time with boom, boom,
right.
boom, 3 monster drives that basically salted the game away. I agree with you. That first turnover, because the Bengals were moving the football, and it was an RPO, and T. Higgins is wide open in the red zone. And Myles Garrett, who wrecked the game with a sack and a half, and then he tips that ball, and then Higgins tries to make a play and tips it, and it's intercepted.
Yeah.
He's wide open in the red zone. If they get in the red zone, if they score first, and you know how it is in the NFL, just one thing like that can change so much of the game.
That really changed the game.
It did. It did. Because they've gone from, they don't care if they win the coin toss or lose it, because usually teams will defer when they win. The Bengals want the ball. They started saying, we want the football. We have to score first, because they were in a stretch of 4 straight games with teams that pounded the ball on the ground. And like you said, when they play keep away, you're done. So best thing to do is score first and, take a lead, play with the lead. And they were in that mindset. And honestly, when they turned that over and didn't get any points, I think they let it linger too long. It's like, all right, let's move on. Let's get over it. Let's move on. And it led to another mistake and then another mistake, and that's a hard dynamic. They definitely felt like they wanted to come out and score first, and they were tracking to do so. And when it didn't happen, it took the wind out of their sails.
Wow. Yeah. The other thing I was going to say to you, Dave, is, and exactly how football is, almost every time I want to draw some huge conclusion to a team's season, you almost always have to say, okay, take a breath, take a deep breath, because this is a 17-game season, and so many weird things can happen in those 17 games. And, I think back over the years that I have covered the NFL, and, Dave, the first year I ever covered an NFL team was 1984 for the Cincinnati Enquirer, covering the Bengals.
Yep.
And what I will never forget about that season, okay, and I don't know how many people who are going to be listening to this will remember, but in that season, the Bengals were really competitive early, but they were losing every game. And then in week 5 at Pittsburgh, they got walloped by the Steelers in a Monday night game. It's like 38-14 or something. And so they were 0-5. And it was abandoned ship. And it was, this is over. But I learned a huge lesson from that game, that season, and that coach. And look, everybody's going to have far differing opinions about Sam Wyche.
Yeah.
But the thing I will never forget about that season is they go to 0-5 and they come back, and Sam was basically, he was like John Belushi in Animal House. Over. It's not over till we say it's over. And right from there, they beat Houston that week.
Yep.
Then they lost a tough one to the Patriots. But then they go on this run from there where they go 7-2 the rest of the way.
Yeah.
And by the end of the year, I remember the Bengals killed Buffalo last week of the season, killed them. And they walk off the field 8-8, not going to the playoffs. But I remember after that game, Sam was talking and I totally agreed with him. Nobody in the league wants to play us right now, because at the time, you got boomers starting to go.
Yep.
And anyway, they're kind of coming alive. But anyway, my whole point is, don't go nuts over 1 or 2 losses, especially when you've got Joe Burrow. That's the thing I say. You got Joe Burrow, and you're always going to have a chance anytime Joe Burrow lines up.
I agree. There's no question. I mean, when you talk around the league and to different people at all the different levels that you talk to people, what is the consensus opinion, or are there common denominator traits about Joe Burrow and his style of play that people talk about?
I mean, everybody's envious, Yeah. And I remember, and I've asked Mike about this too, whether, they actually got that offer of 5-1s from Miami, to move up to get Burrow. And Mike's answer to me was, well, it wouldn't have mattered what the offer was. We weren't trading it. Because you see how valuable a quarterback is. But I think the way people around the league look at Burrow is probably the way most people in Cincinnati look at Burrow. And that is, it's afraid of nothing. He's got a great arm. He's not stupid. He respects the game. And he's a great teammate. Look, for all the bad luck the Bengals have had over the years in the last 2 decades, let's say, this is a phenomenal bit of good fortune that they happen to have the first pick, deservedly so, when Burrow came along. And I know over the years, a lot of people have said, oh my God, Mike Brown, he's a dinosaur, get rid of the team, please. But, Mike Brown in this case was absolutely right. Do not trade the pick. It doesn't matter if you get 10 ones.
Right.
Because a quarterback, you can't quantify how huge it is to have a quarterback and to get that position solidified.
No doubt. No question about it. And, there's a lot of years left. I mean, it as they say, it's only the beginning. The one thing, in my years anyway, playing and covering the league, and even in college, and even in high school, I mean, as a player, it's like the one thing that the variable you can't control is injury. And one thing you don't want to have is an injury to an extremely important player that is going to be for a long period of time. So the Bengals are cruising along, and then Chase goes down with the hip injury, and it's still to be determined how many weeks. Will it be 3? Will it be 4? Will it be less? Who knows what it's going to be, but he's down. And then during the course of this football game, Awuzie tears his ACL. He's out. So now your best receiver, your best cover guy in back-to-back weeks go down. And that's the variable that, is like, oh, man. I know we've got a good roster. We've got, depth in a lot of places to take care of things like that if you're a Bengal coach thinking out loud. But, boy, you don't want to lose those kind of guys for an extended period of time. And that is the variable that keeps coaches up at night, that turns their hair gray, or they go bald because they're pulling it out of their head.
What you really want with, if there's any way you can, you want to get Chase back for what I think is probably their biggest 3-game stretch of the year left, which is Tennessee, Kansas City, Cleveland, and that's 3 weeks from now. So you would hope that, especially with Zach Taylor saying they're not putting him on injured reserve for now,
right?
Because they're just not sure about this injury. Dave, I sort of look at you kind of look for signs. If you're not putting a guy on injured reserve, then you think that there's a really good chance that he is going to be able to make it through in less than 4 weeks.
Yep.
So all you can do is hope for that. But look, I look back at the Super Bowl and I say, well, if you're concerned about making it through without having a great player like Jamar Chase with you, look no further than the Super Bowl, the biggest game this team has played in decades. And in that game, the mail carrier at the receiver position was T. Higgins. So
True.
But you also understand that part of the reason that Higgins was so big in that game is because the Rams had to focus attention on Chase too.
Absolutely.
So now that kind of goes away. I think the way I look at it, Dave, is I think you've got a very motivated mentally and physically Hayden Hurst at this point of his life, at this point of his career. And I mean, you've got a game that obviously, they should win. against Carolina. But, then they head into the bye. I would, if I were Burrow, I'd be concentrating a little bit more on, the intermediate throws and, the 10 and 12 play drives if you can, rather than trying to strike it rich downfield. Because without Chase, I think that part of your game really does have to change.
Let's talk about the upcoming opponent. You mentioned the Carolina Panthers. They've made a coaching change. They basically traded their best football player, McCaffrey, to the San Francisco 49ers. They're obviously saying we're rebuilding this thing, tearing it down and rebuilding it. DJ Moore, the last game, DJ Moore makes a play after dropping a ball, makes a play to make up for it with a touchdown and takes the helmet off. And I personally thought he was off the field, but it was close, and all those kind of things that go with it. And, let his emotions get away from him, penalized because of that penalty, missed a game-winning extra point. Then in overtime, missed a game-winning field goal from like 41 yards, I think it was, and then lose that football game. But this team is playing hard. The Carolina Panthers have been in every game, haven't they, Peter?
Here's the thing about Carolina that if I were the Bengals, I'd be a little concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
They have this, you can just tell, you can feel it, what's been being said by their players, what the guys, the media people in their locker room are saying. This team badly wants to get this job or a job for Steve Wilks. I think in the player community, Steve Wilks is a very significant figure because people think he got jobbed when he only got 1 year, 2018, with the Arizona Cardinals.
Right.
And so I think one of the things you see is the players on Carolina, they, so far anyway, they've had 2 games. They've had they've had 3 games because that's how many Wilks has coached. But they lose at the Rams, and then they manhandled the Bucks, and then they should have beaten the Falcons. So be careful when you've got an internal motivating factor, like they desperately want to win for this coach. So this game, the Bengals absolutely should win it and really need to win it. But even though all those things are true, there are just no locks in the NFL. Any team that beats Tom Brady by 18, any team that goes on the road to Atlanta and twice has the game in their hands only to blow it, that's a team that's going to be a tough team to beat.
Agreed. Yeah. Short week, at least you're at home. It's a son of a gun when you have that short week and you have to travel. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's a killer. But at least the Bengals are at Paycor Stadium, and we'll have a little bit of an advantage there, hopefully, with a crowd in full throat. Let's talk about the league as a whole a little bit, since I have one of the brightest minds that covers the National Football League. Why do you think that scoring is down? Do you think it's because nobody's participating in preseason games and very little training camp reps and the early stage of the season? Is that, or do you think it's something else?
No, I think that one of the biggest things that's happening this year, Dave, is, I find this to be a little bit ironic. I think you're probably seeing more teams and more defensive snaps than any time in a long time, where teams are playing that too deep look.
Yep.
And they're basically saying, playing 2 safeties 18 to 22 yards down the field. They're saying, hey, listen, go ahead. We're going to risk that you can't go 75 yards in 13 plays, but we're certainly not going to let you go 75 yards in 6 plays. We're going to make you work for it. It was just like the Bengals last night. You see, they're going downfield, they're working, everything is working. And then all of a sudden, tipped pass, batted pass, interception, end of drive, and they don't score anything in the first half.
Right.
And I think more and more teams say, please, we'll let you, we're going to bend but not break. That's what teams are saying. We're going to give you a bunch of first downs. We don't care about losing the yardage battle. We care about losing the points battle, because that's how games are decided in scoring, so
Right.
I think that is a big part of it. And I think the other thing that is a part of it, I don't know how big, but Dave, usually midway through the second year of a quarterback's life in the modern NFL, where everybody is throwing so much in college, that usually by midway through the second year, you're seeing a lot of quarterbacks really starting to get it, starting to play well. But I challenge you right now, these 6 quarterbacks picked at the top of the 2021 draft, Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Mac Jones, Davis Mills. Those 6 guys, are you positive that any one of those 6 is the man or will be the man for their teams?
Right.
I mean, you have not seen yet any real rock solid evidence that those guys are going to be great. Right. So I also think that's part of it. We just had a weekend where Trevor Lawrence handed a game to the Denver Broncos. We saw a game that Zach Wilson handed a game to the New England Patriots. And, we see Davis Mills struggling mightily. Justin Fields actually is playing well. I think he's had a couple of good games in a row, more design runs for him. But in general, it used to be that you would just think, Brian Billick used to say, first round draft pick quarterbacks, it's absolutely insane how reliable it is. Half make it, half don't. And look, we might be 0 for 5 or whatever in the 2021 draft, unless those guys turn it around. But I think that's also a little bit a part of the scoring drought.
Very interesting. We're talking about 3 hours from the trade deadline is when we're having this conversation. There were some big trades, McCaffrey, Smith at linebacker, that big trade. Do you anticipate anything else? I mean, it takes 2 to tango, and there's a lot of activity. Usually there's a lot of phone calls made, but very few times does it result in a trade. Do you think there's anything else brewing?
Well, the Vikings, I don't know. The Vikings have traded now for TJ Hawkinson, which is really an interesting trade from a lot of different angles. The biggest of which is the 2 general managers, Minnesota's Adolfo Quasi-Adolfo-Mensah, excuse me, sorry, and Brad Holmes of the Lions, who are friends. They made another big kind of intra-division trade, which is really kind of a big deal, which I just think it's really interesting. I would be surprised, honestly, if the Packers don't do anything. But again, we'll know in 3 hours. I think the one other thing without any question is that teams are less afraid to trade, Dave, than they were in the day when you were a player and I was young in this business. The trade deadline way back then never really mattered, but it really matters now. And I don't think it's going to be a lot of activity, but I do think there are a lot of conversations happening right now as we speak.
Get you out of here on this, sir, and appreciate all the time you carve for us, because I know you are a busy man. How big can the NFL get? I mean, it is a monster. It's a 500-pound gorilla. It's in a good place, and you're a big reason why. I mean, everything you do for the league is a big factor. How big can it get?
Well, a week from now, Dave, I'm going to cover that game in Germany between Tampa Bay and Seattle, but I'm going to cover all the stuff around it more than I am to cover that game. When they asked for, if you're interested in tickets, reach out and let us know. We'll tell you about it. They had more than 2 million requests for information about tickets for that game. And look, here's the thing, Dave. You ask how big can it get? If the NFL is willing to be imaginative about international play and development, and not just play maybe 4 or 5 games in different countries every year, but if they would be willing, essentially, if they could get buy-in from the teams in the league and from the owners to say, we want to have a game every year in Australia. We want to have a game every year in China. Right. We want to have a game we want to have a game every year in Brazil. We want the Miami Dolphins to play a game every other year, every 3 years in Brazil. I know all this is going to sound crazy, but to me, if the NFL's goal is to make money and to internationalize this game, they can do that. But it's going to take a lot of buy-in from all of the owners in the league who would essentially say, we are willing, let's say, instead of every 8 years, because now every 8 years, they've got to give up one home game to play overseas. I think they might have to be willing to say, if they really want to make this an international game, to do it every 4 years. I don't know how many owners, if they could get 32 owners to vote for that, but that to me is the next step on the horizon if they choose to do that.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Great information. This was as good as I hoped it would be. You're the best. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it. Thanks for calling and checking in, and let's stay in touch. And hopefully later in the year when I come in to cover them, we can see each other.
Look forward to that, sir. Have an enjoyable season. Safe travels everywhere, including Germany.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Peter.
At First Star Logistics, we're a very strict company that really puts the pressure on our employees. Brakes? What are those?
That's what I'm talking about, Icky. Get the body right, then the mind's right.
Gotta get that body right.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
Become a star with a chance to earn the highest commission percentages in the industry as a freight broker agent. Check out firststarlogistics.com.